Hey everyone, this is Ellie Mae with Artesprix, and today we are going to be creating with the Artesprix apron and making a fun design. So let's first go over some of the supplies. I am going to be working with the Artesprix Sublimation acrylic paints and also the Artesprix Sublimation markers. I'm going to be using the black fine point. I have the black fine point marker that has been sitting with the point down for about 20 minutes. You want to make sure to get that ink flowing before you start to use them. And then I'm going to be working with some paint colors and creating a design. So those are the items that you'll need to get started with for this project, but you could also use any of the Artesprix Sublimation products in your creations. So make sure to check out the other videos on the Artesprix channel where we are sharing different projects and ideas for inspiration. I'm going to also be using Artesprix heat tape. This is specialized heat tape that works with the high heat that sublimation requires for the heat press or your heat source. One of the most important parts of the process is your Artesprix protective paper. This is siliconized paper that is going to help protect the surface of your heat source. You do not want to get sublimation inks of any kind onto your heat source, or it can transfer to other objects for other projects. And then I just have some water here and a paint palette. I'm going to be working with some sponges with the paint, so I have those already, and then just some basic supplies. Artesprix sublimation products can be used with basic ordinary copy paper. So this is a great resource for you to dive into sublimation and start playing around. And if you don't like it, you can set it aside, start again with another simple piece of copy paper, and you are really not out anything. So I also have a ruler here for measuring onto the apron, and then a paintbrush, pencil. Pencil is very important with sublimation. We won't be using it today, but it's great to have on hand in case you do want to use it. Pencil does not transfer to your sublimation blanks, so it is a great resource to use when you are trying to get sizing, or you want to sketch, or you want to measure, or different things like that. And then just a pair of scissors, sharp scissors, that will work. So we are going to go ahead and get started with this. I also grabbed just this little tin. I ran out of paper plates, so I'm going to use this as my Artesprix kind of palette. This is great if you are working with paints in small and a paintbrush, but I'm going to be working with some sponges, so this is going to give me a better surface area for that. So I'm just going to clean up my space and we will get started. Now, the first thing you want to do with any of your sublimation blanks is you want to measure your space that you have available. So I am going to, the apron is large, so you can't really see the whole thing on the screen, but I want to measure the top area where, here's the neck, where it's going to go around your neck, and I just want to measure this area so I know what size of design I want to use. So I can also take this piece of copy paper, and you can see it will fit just perfectly right here in front and center on this apron. So then I just need to decide how large of a design that I want to show. And you want to keep in mind that an apron is going to fold around a person. So you don't want your design to, unless it's a full apron design, that's completely different. But we're going to be working with front and center here. So you want to keep that in mind so that your design is centered onto your apron and visible, completely visible in this. So we're going to be working in this space. So you can go ahead and use your ruler to measure so you have an idea on that. Now I'm going to put this to the side, and you want to keep it as clean as possible, but I would also grab a lint roller since this is out of the package. I will use that lint roller before we go to press it. So I have that on hand as well. Now I've taken my Artesprix sublimation marker and I have used a silhouette cutting machine. Any machine that can use a pen in the machine you could sketch with. If your pen fits in your machine, such as a Silhouette, a Cricut, or a Caesar cutting machine, then you can utilize it and do some sketches. You can see here I have done several of them. So here's a look. I set it up in the Silhouette Studio software. So here's a look at using the sketching with the Silhouette Cameo 5. Since it was a machine and able to recreate the designs very easily, I went ahead And as you can see here, I just played around. It's just copy paper. So have some fun, play around, see what's going to happen. I will say with cutting machines, here's a little tip for you. When you're working with a cutting machine with sketching, oftentimes the machine will actually have a pause at the bottom before it lifts that tool and moves on to the end. That can create little dots of pooled ink. So I always create just a shape that is going to be sketched after my design is done. That way, if it does pool any ink with any pen that you're using, it's going to do it in this area with this additional shape versus onto your sketch design. So that's just a little extra tip. Now, I can go with an outline shape here. You could color it in with your hand, with your markers. That would be an option. Here is showing one that I did use the machine to sketch it in. You want to keep in mind that the more fill that you have when you're having a machine do it, that ink is getting saturated and laying down onto that paper. So just keep that in mind. If you are using an adhesive cutting mat, that can also cause it to stick to that adhesive cutting mat a little more in those areas because that pen has gone over it and over it and over it. So just some tips to keep in mind when you're doing that. This one, I think turned out pretty darn cool. But the best part about this is one, a couple things. Best parts are it's copy paper. I am not out anything if I don't use this design, any of these designs. Two, I have these two designs here that I actually have four I could choose from. I'm going to set those aside. So I have backups if I want to go back to it. And these two, I can go ahead and do the same techniques with both of them and decide before I go to press which one I like better. So I'm going to share how I do that with one, and then through movie magic, number two will show up. So we're going to start with this one, I think. And what I want to do, actually, I'm going to start with this one. Tough decisions here. So I'm going to start with this one. And what I want to do, first off, I'm going to either take this off or either way, take this off, or I'm going to cover this with a piece of heat tape. So we'll see. I can always take it off at the end. If I cover it with heat tape, it acts as a resist and it's not going to transfer to my blank. And then I don't want that circle onto my apron. But then that gives me a little bit more surface area here. You can take it off if you'd like. So the first thing I'm going to start with is you want to keep in mind also, this design is not particularly directional, but let's pull this one in here, this other side. So I did flip my image and it is mirrored when it sketches, because when I go to apply it to my blank, it's going to be flipped over on top of that. So I don't know if you can see it. We'll see if the camera can pick it up. You can see my image is going to be mirrored onto that object below. So you want to keep that in mind, especially if you're working with text. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start working with the Artesprix orange, but I want to lighten it a bit. So we're going to work with this white, which is not technically a white paint, but it is a lightening medium for the sublimation paints. So you have your wide selection here of your sublimation paints by Artesprix that you can use to mix and match and get color palettes. So that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to get this mixed up and bring out a lighter color than this basic orange. Now I've sped this up a little bit. Keep in mind when you mix paint that once you mix that color, if you run out of that color, it's very difficult to match it exactly. So even if you need to make up a little bit more extra paint than what you plan to use for your project, that can be better, especially since you can use the extra on copy paper. Now once I have my color mixed here, I just mixed it as best I could, but I can see even here, let me pull it up here closer. There is some paint that's still not mixed in, and that is okay. It can give it some depth and dimension. Just make sure you don't have any big sections and areas. Keep that in mind. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring in this paper. It's a scrap piece of copy paper. I'm going to kind of use that as my blot off. So I want to start, and I I wiped off the bottom of that with it, so you want to keep that in mind too. The lightning medium is going to give us a little bit different look than this basic bright orange, but I will be using the bright orange as well. But I want to give this sort of a sponged look to see what happens. So we're going to go ahead and just pull some of that, and less is more. You want to start, see, so that's kind of what I'm going for, is just to give it a unique look with that sponge and the texture. And I want to start off pretty light. So I can blot it off on this, and then I can always use this for future projects as well. So none of this is really wasted when we're working with the Artesprix Sublimation paints. I have piles of papers that when I'm making these videos that I blot off these excess, and eventually someday I'll make additional projects with it. So it'll be a cool look. So I'm just gonna start, make sure there's no debris on my page. And I'm just gonna start all over. And a lighter is better, or a light hand to start with is better, because you can always go back and add. You can't really take away though.
Have some fun and see what possibilities you can come up with.
And your darker colors, keep in mind your color, the darker colors should show through on the design. So your black should show through with this.
The hardest part for me is keeping some sort of random pattern. I am a very linear person, and that can come through in my sponging and painting techniques. Just have fun.
I'm going to set this one aside to dry in a safe place while I go ahead and use some of this paint up on this one in this background, and we'll get a different look on this one. Now I still have quite a bit of paint here. Like I said, I am just going to use some of that excess. And since I did extra sketches, I might as well just play around and see how that goes. So I'm going to use up this excess paint. I'll come back with the bright orange here in just a second. Now I have several sheets that are drying. I'll show those at the very end, but I'm going to pull in my original first one I started with, and then I'm going to grab just the regular paint, and this is going to be darker than the previous, and we can give this kind of a different look. So I have a couple, since I use this sketch pen and I have extra sheets, I have a couple here that I can just test and see what I like, what sponge technique comes out. And in this one here that's drying, it's still quite wet because it has a heavier paint on it. So then I can come in with the darker color in the middle. I could have done the lighter in the middle. Maybe that would have been better. But you can just play around and see what you like. And then we have all these extras for the excess paint. So I never wash paint down the sink. I always do an extra sheet, even if it is a small half sheet, and just press that on top of the paint to pick up as much as possible. So all kinds of ideas that you can do. So I'm just going to take this. I am going to use a new sponge just so that I can pick up that color. And then I'm going to do the same thing. Lightly sponge some additional color in some areas on this design. And if I wanted to, I can bring in a little bit of brown paint. I will need to grab a little bit smaller paintbrush, and I might paint in here for those stems in those areas that it is showing. So I have that. I'm going to quickly go through and add some of this darker paint to the additional ones, and then we'll see at the very end when they're completely dry which one is going to win and be the final choice to add to our apron.
Now I wanted to share a glimpse at finishing out the rest of them. I just continued to add paint, and I even added some water to the paint. That gave it a little bit different look. It diluted it a little bit better and added a little bit different color to it too.
Now once you're done, you just want to clean up your space with Artesprix Sublimation paints and inks. Clean up with water, so it's not hard to clean up at all. I'm just wiping off the paint from my silicone mat, and so it doesn't transfer to my blank. So just clean this up real quick and wash out your paintbrushes well with your sublimation inks, and I also washed out the sponges too. Just dry off this surface. And then I have my heat source is at 400 degrees. I'm going to press it for 60 seconds. But first I want to make sure there's no paint wet on my hands. And I want to make sure that my print is dry before I go to put it on top of my blank. So here is the one I think I'm going to press. It's a hard decision. But I think I'm going to press this one. We'll see how it turns out on the front of this apron. So I'm going to set that one aside while I get my apron ready to go. So the first thing I want to do, I'm going to bring this up into the camera view and decide where I want it to be pressed at. And then I want to take my lint roller, and any fuzzes or lint or debris that might have gotten on it after it's been in the package can affect how your sublimation print turns out when it is pressed, because the sublimation ink turns into a gas, transfers from your copy paper onto the blank. So anything that is in between can be affected or interfere with the actual, what the print is going to be. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set that back aside. I'm going to take this over to my heat source. I'm going to pre-press it to get out any moisture that is inside of this. And when you are pressing with any sort of apron or materials, you do want to keep in mind that seams can interfere with full pressure, because the heat source will hit the seams first before it gets to the actual material. So that means that your press or your print may not get full pressure if those seams are interfering. So I've just carefully placed that outside on my press. And then I have pre-pressed this so there is no moisture in the area that I'm going to be putting this design on. Now, you could feather the edges of this if you would like, which I think I will do. I'm just going to tear the edges around my print just to give it a little bit more of an uneven look. Sometimes I know I get very linear in my stamping, so I'm just going to take this, I'm going to tear it around the edges to give it a distressed, ununiform look. A random look, I guess, is the word I'm looking for there. And you don't have to do this. You can do the whole press or the whole sheet of paper if you'd like. But kind of want an oval shaped design here. If your design is needs to be centered, you do want to find the center point of your apron and the center point of your design. This one is pretty easy, I think, to kind of line up with the center point of the middle pumpkin. So I'm making a fall type apron. I'm going to flip that over, position it where I want, and then I'm going to take some of the Artesprix heat tape and I'm going to make sure that this is going to be secure and there's going to be nothing that can get up in between, such as air. So I just want it to be secure so it does not shift. If it shifts, it can cause ghosting, which sometimes can have a cool look to it, but it's usually not what you're going for in your results. But I do just want to make sure I'm getting this completely secure so it doesn't move from the time I move it over here to transfer, and that those gases are going to be protected and stay within on my print. Then I'm going to grab my Artesprix protective paper. I'm going to cut 2 pieces that are going to completely cover my entire design, top and bottom. This is a very important part of the process and probably the loudest part of it too, especially when on camera. I'm going to take 1 sheet, place it on top of my heat source so my bottom platen is protected. I'm going to place my blank on top of that sheet of protective paper with my print on the top. So the print is going to be what hits my, is at the closest point to my heat source surface. And then I'm going to, very, very important, take my next sheet of protective paper and I'm going to place it on top so it fully covers my print. I'm going to close the press 400 degrees for 60 seconds. Movie magic, it's gonna go by super fast. Once the timer's up, I'm going to carefully release the top and just kind of let it settle there for just a second. Give it a chance for those gases to settle before I remove this. And the reveal is always the funnest part. I am going to grab my Artesprix protective mat. This is a heat safe protective mat that's going to protect my work surface underneath here. So I can go ahead and remove this and I have my heat safe source. And then I want to remove this. I'm going to share this. I can see it, so hopefully it comes up on camera. But anytime you have ink that you can see for sure, you do not want to reuse this protective paper at all. Any ink that it transfers onto the transfer or the siliconized paper could transfer to a future project or to your heat surface. So I just take this and throw it away. And then carefully remove your blank. It is going to be extremely hot since we pressed it at 400 degrees. So you do want to be very careful with that. And then same thing on your bottom. I just throw this away for the best results so it doesn't transfer to my future project. So let's go ahead and let's move some of this out of the way and take a peek and reveal. Ooh, ooh. Now, even though I taped it down, I did have a little bit of ghosting on some of it, but it still looks pretty cool. The black is very, very vivid on this. So here is a look at that apron. I love how the lighter color that I made with the orange and the lightning medium showed up completely different. Still with the orange characteristics, but a little bit of yellow in there to make the pumpkins really stand out. And then I have all of these extra little sheets that I can decide what to do with. I have some, this one's still wet, so I want to be careful with that. I have these sheets I can use for future projects. I'm not out anything, it's just using up that excess paint that I had, especially when I'm using that sponging technique. So all kinds of fun things. The biggest thing is to just keep going. Here's a look at that final one. I have to decide, the hardest part for me is deciding what to put these on for the next thing. So I just keep them in a pile, let them dry, keep them in a pile for a future project. But this is a fun little project. You could do a design across this entire apron. You could use this for crafting projects, craft nights with a group of people. What fun would that be? If you have any questions, please let us know in the comments below. Make sure to check out the links in the description for all of the supplies used and additional Artesprix inspiration on the Artesprix website. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.